started in just a couple of minutes. We have a very full program tonight. So I'd ask all of you, people are arriving late. There are code books in the back here if you want to create a little bit more room, especially for those in the back. There are code books over there. There's also a bathroom there, and there's also a bathroom outside in the cafe.
And there are also some seating back here.
There's a seat here. And I will ask anyone who has their coats over there on seating, would you please hang it, because we're going to need every seat.
Put it behind your back.
Thank you for coming out. I'm Tara I'm with Brooklyn for Peace. Thanks everyone. Brooklyn for Peace has been active in Brooklyn since 1984. We're a very grassroots community peace group, and we can always need help. So we thank you for coming out tonight. If you don't know us and want to volunteer with us, anything you want to do, if you want to learn to write letters to the editor, if you want to help us with the mailing, if you want to help us distribute those refugees are welcome here posters that you've seen in many stores and that we're selling here at the table. If you want to help make buttons that we sell at street fairs, if you're a designer, we can use your help too with flyers and with websites. So if you want to help out or learn more about Brooklyn for Peace, email us at volunteers@brooklynpeace.org. Now, besides having a very full program, one of the main purposes of this event is to raise money for relief for the people of Yemen. You've probably seen the slide coming up here. You can donate online. Many of you have already done that. And later tonight, we will be passing around buckets for you to donate either cash or checks. If you're writing a check, please write it to Action Against Hunger, not Brooklyn for Peace, because that is the humanitarian agency that is actually doing the work in Yemen, and someone from that organization will be speaking a little later. So, and please be very generous. None of the performers or speakers tonight are getting a fee. They're all doing it to support the people of Brooklyn. So please, the people of Yemen. So please be generous. We're going to start in just a minute now, so I would ask you all to silence your cell phones. We'll give you a minute to do that.
There's seating back here.
And there is seating on the side there again for latecomers. There are coat books in the back there, if you could put your coats up there. So we're going to begin with two musicians playing. Ed's trying to get people to sit. It's Mohammed and Hadi Elgabek. They are brothers, educators, entrepreneurs, and excellent musicians. They'll be playing music from the Arab world, and they'll give you a little explanation of what they're doing.
Marina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to be here and to take part in this event and support such a great cause. We like the people of Yemen. We like the culture of Yemen with all of its music and rhythms and food and halim. If you don't know what that is, you should go check it out. So we're going to give you a little bit of an explanation or invite you to the culture of Arabic music and to the instruments that are also played in Yemen. I'm going to start with a piece of music called Georgina Hosseini on a scale called Georgina. How many of you is experienced with Arabic music or know anything about Arabic music? Raise your hands. All right, a few hands. Amazing. Okay, so for those who know and those who don't, this is an instrument called oud. It's an essential and primary instrument in the classical Arabic music, and this instrument is called tabla or baraka. Depends where you are. So, you know, across the Arab world, when you travel, you experience different rhythms. When you say Arabic music, we're not very accurate because Arabic music from where? Really, you know? The music from Iraq is very different from the music in the Levantine, from the music from Egypt and Gulf countries and Morocco. So this piece we played is actually more an Iraqi piece. It has the Georgina feel, so the count is in 10, whereas most of the counts and the rhythms in the Levantine is in 4. So instead of counting a cycle of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're doing a count of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a little bit technical. We're gonna stop there. We're gonna move to Morocco actually, and sing a song on which you could actually sing back with us. So there's a popular song that's known in most of the Arab world called Halla Halla Ya Baba. And that's from Tunis. Yes, there you go.
You gotta control me, because I would want to get
You're out of control. I don't think it is control you. So, can we say, I'm going to say Ya Baba. Can you say Ya Baba? Ya Baba. It's a term of endearment. You know, in India, they use this a lot. Like, you know, Mo Baba, Hadi Baba, you know, it's like my dear friend, my dear Hadi, etc. So apparently it's similar also in Tunisia. I didn't know that before. So
It means Baba, father.
it doesn't really, it's not really, it's more of a term of endearment. So when I sing, Allah, Allah, ya Baba, Wislam alik, ya Baba, Allah, Allah, ya Baba, ya Baba, Wislam alik, ya Baba, Sidi Mansour, ya Baba, نيجيك نزور, ya Baba, Sidi Mansour, ya Baba, نيجيك نزور, ya Baba. You got this. Fantastic. All right, let's do it. Feel free to clap if you feel like it. Allah, Allah, ya Baba, wassalam alayk. Allah, Allah, ya Baba, wassalam alayk. Sidi Mansour, ya Baba, نيجيك نزور. Sidi Mansour, نيجيك نزور, ya Baba. أشهد بالله عاشقت سواك أشهد بالله عاشقت سواك جرح الحبيب علاش صعيب وش حالي يدير بل هو بعدك وأشهد بالله عاشقت سواك ونجيك يا سيدي ونجيك يا سيدي مش معطيني وتنار في قلبي نار في قلبي يا حيواني الله الله يا بابا سلام عليك يا بابا الله الله يا بابا سلام عليك يا بابا سيدي منصور يجيك نزور يا بابا سيدي منصور يجيك نزور يا بابا الله الله يا بابا سلام عليك يا بابا الله الله يا بابا سلام عليك يا بابا سيدي منصور يا بابا يجيك نزور يا بابا سيدي منصور يا بابا يجيك نزور يا بابا. Okay, so apparently we're done. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, of course. And for these for organizing this. My name is Hadi Abdelbek and he's Mohammed Abdelbek.
I have a feeling that the calling for an encore. very much. I hope you know from the enthusiastic response of the audience that they really loved your music, and we thank you so much for coming out. We're going to rearrange the set a little bit here because we have two wonderful performers coming up, Karen Malpe and Kathleen Chalfant. Karen is a playwright, many of you know, a Brooklyn-based playwright who's also co-founder of the Theater 3 Collaborative. Kathleen Chalfant is the Tony-nominated actor for the original Broadway production of Angels in America. They'll be doing a short play that Karen wrote called Dinner in Yemen. Dinner during Yemen, yeah. And Karen was inspired by the events in Yemen now, and in fact, it was Karen who suggested that we have an event like this at the Commons. So we're very
Hi, can you hear us? Yes? Picking up on the mic? Not that. I have a cold, so. Anyway, hi, thank you. So, you will hear one great actress, Kathleen Chalfant. And me. Not an actress.
She's really splendid too, in so many ways.
But this is a small play called
Please use the mic.
Hold on a second.
Can you hear?
No.
It needs to be very close to you, Karen.
Here we are.
Kathleen knows where it is.
Yes, we need put the tripod under the chair.
Yes? Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
Is that better?
Yes,
Here.
much better.
Is it live, that mic?
Yeah, it's fine. Good. Sweet. Okay. We're ready. So dinner during Yemen, Rita and Nita meet for dinner in the apartment of Rita. A terrible cry is heard.
Is that an animal?
Or a child.
Whatever for?
Animal-like?
When they get that hungry, I suppose.
That's what I meant, yes.
Civilization is but a veneer.
Why would anyone let their child starve?
No one would let it, I suppose.
Not let, exactly.
It's complex.
Totally.
Allegiances, patronage, family.
Names difficult to pronounce.
Well, it's over there.
So much happens somewhere else.
One can't keep things straight in one's head.
Civil wars are the absolute worst.
Oh, yes, so much suffering. For what?
Would you pass the oysters on the half shell?
Moonshoals and Kumamoto.
Afloat in their own juice.
So smooth, sliding down the throat.
I don't think they cry like that.
Like what?
What we just heard.
A whimper, perhaps.
That's what I meant.
When they get weak.
Must have been an animal caught in a trap.
Unsettling, nevertheless.
They turn their heads, unclench their little fingers and
It
toes.
must be so terrible to watch.
Oh my goodness, I could not watch that.
I change the channel, that's what I do.
I meant if it were mine.
Yours?
Yes.
How could that be?
It couldn't, of course.
Well, that's a blessing, is it not?
However do such terrible things come to pass?
Quite complex.
I can't keep any of it straight.
That's the baked bass.
So many people need our help.
Absolutely divine braised buttery sauce.
And Time's recipe. It's a proxy war.
Why don't they just stop?
That's what I cannot figure out.
Simply open the ports.
It's not helpful to criticize the Saudis.
Quite right, I forgot.
Saudi Arabia is our ally.
Nobody makes what we make, and now we're selling it all over the world.
Is that so?
I'm quoting President Trump.
Whatever was he talking about?
Missile defense system.
Ah, such a comfort they are.
The Houthis shot a missile at Saudi Arabia.
Iran gave it to them. That made everything worse.
Our missile defense system knocked their missile right out of the sky.
Well, of course it did.
I'll take a piece of that roast beef.
Please.
Tender.
Grass-raised, organic,
If one's going to eat meat.
in moderation, all our little sins.
No one in Saudi was hurt.
We can be thankful for that. Otherwise, who knows?
That's the salt. Goodness, yes, World War III.
Yemen imports most of its food.
Too arid to grow wheat, barley, oats.
The Saudis have blockaded the ports,
Well, one supposes they have no choice.
as long as the Houthis, of course.
The Shiite Houthi.
Are they?
Yazidi, yes.
And the Saudis are Sunni.
Wahhabis.
They don't like the Houthi.
Wonder why that is.
Well, the Houthi don't think much of them.
The Houthi believe they're winning.
Al-Qaeda, of course, is taking advantage.
We've had to put boots on the ground.
That's not so. Is that so?
I suppose so.
Airstrikes, I know
Well,
about.
airstrikes, of course.
I'm full of.
Me too.
There might have been civilians.
I don't think so.
Yes, in the market, 52.
Precision instruments, first-rate intelligence.
Mistakes happen.
The area is thick with insurgents.
Civilians in their beds.
They use civilians as human shields.
Barbarians.
I like this salted dark chocolate.
There's cholera, too.
Chocolate's good for digestion.
The United Nations fears mass starvation.
Don't get me started
It's just a small piece. It's not terribly caloric.
on the United Nations.
Oh, yes. Nobody likes them.
We had such great hopes once.
For world peace, yes.
World peace, yes.
We can still wish.
Well, we still do, of course.
Let's toast to world peace in the new year.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. And that was a wonderful part of the cultural presentation tonight. We're going to go into something not quite so uplifting. We have two speakers. Ibrahim Katabi is a Yemeni American, quite well known in the city and particularly in this area. He does live in Brooklyn. He's currently working for the Center for Constitutional Rights. And just give us a moment, we'll get the PowerPoint up. And he'll be talking a little bit about the history, brief history of Yemen, what the political situation is in there now, and particularly with the role that the United States is playing in Yemen. The other PowerPoint. Yeah. Sam, the...
Oh, no, I think she's coming back. We got one seat over here. We have a seat over here. Is there a seat on the couch over there? Is there a seat in the back? You got two seats. You made it.
Amazing how many.
You got another seat there? Two. One there.
I saw on the computer 270 people were interested, so I got to a top conference right now.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
One over there, right?
How's everybody doing this evening? Yes, this is incredible event, right? Together, all united, right? I didn't know an awful lot about Arabic music, so I thought that was pretty remarkable, right? Everybody thought that was great? So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to give. We're going to pay more attention
to what's going on. We're going to try to help in every way we can, because we're all human beings, right? And we respect each other, right? And as they're running through their technical difficulties, I used to have some great card tricks, but I forgot it, because I'm under a lot of pressure. Oh, yeah. Are you ready? We're ready. We'll say goodbye to me.
Ibrahim Katabi. I know how to spell it. I can spell for it. Because he came to Staten. Oh, you got it right. Ibrahim. Then this is Q. But the rest is right.
Thank you. I'm just trying to take my own notes.
It's great. He always does.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone out here. You got it. I mean, after the music and the other part of it, which laid out the talk about, specifically about Yemen, I just want to ask, generally speaking, how many of you know something about Yemen besides the war right now? Can you tell me one thing that you know about Yemen?
Sana'a.
Oh, Sana'a, capital, Sana'a.
What about Sana'a?
The capital.
The capital. All right, let's get something else. All right, that's the American. Okay, it's a sad part. Okay, so this is the basic things about Yemen. Yemen is the Sana'a, the birthplace of Arabs. It has the oldest city in the world right now. Sana'a still exists, and it was built about six.
No, they're gonna raise it.
All right. It was built about 6,000 years ago, and people are still living there. You also have the first skyscrapers. We call them behind the desert. They're in the south part of the country, about 300 to 400 years. Buildings, 17 stories made of mud, and they still exist and people still live on them. They look similar to Manhattan. I can show you the pictures. If we go to the next slide. All right. So anyway, it is also, we have Socotra, an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It is one of the greatest, they call it the 10 wonders of the world. It has different spices, cheese, like that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's a UN protected island. It's currently occupied by the Arab coalition, the UAE in particular. It also was called back in the day the Arabian Felix. It was green, mountains, a lot of trading happening there. So it was one of those spots in the world where people used to go to for food and other stuff and trading. Can you move to the second? Oh. All right, so I'll start by talking about so I'll talk about briefly about the history. A lot of people, in order to understand what's happening in the ground and the circle of power, you need to know exactly what led to this. And I think this is what I'm going to talk about tonight. A significant brief history of how Yemen evolved, and at least in the last 60 years, and why we have what we have today. So, before 1960s, there were about 12 what we call sultanates in the south part of the country, little kingdoms run by certain families. And then now in the north we had the what they called the Kingdom of Yemen, or the Patriarchal Kingdom of Yemen, was in the north part of the country, and a family called Hamiduddin family ruled that part of the country for about 1,000 years. Not a particular family, but the same families. So in 1960, when we have similar to the Arab Spring today, revolutions were declared all across the Arab world, from Egypt to Iraq to Libya to Yemen, exactly like what happened in the Arab Spring. Yemen was one of those countries. So in 1962, this is the old city, Sana'a. This is the old Sana'a. It is like that since thousands of years ago. This is the Sana'a Hospital. Is a new hospital. I mean, the mosque is a new mosque that about a couple of years old. But this is the old city, part of the old city, but not the old city. Can you move to the next slide? This is what I call Manhattan the Desert. Everyone, it's the neighborhood, Manhattan the Desert. Looks like Manhattan. It's 17 stories. People still live there, made of mud. It's in the middle of the desert. So this is how Yemen looked like. This is, to me, this is why the struggle for power is happening right now, because it is in a very important strategic location. It connects the East with the West. Most of the world trade in oil goes through what we call the passageway of Aden, the Canal of Aden. This is where, if Yemen is to develop in the right way and join the developed world, this part of the country would be one of the main important parts, which turning this city, like the city of Aden, for example, into cities like Dubai, for example, right? So this is part of it. There was a struggle of power between East and West back in the day, where who can control this water passageway. Can you move to the next slide? So before, the South and North, before, we have the tribal system. This still exists today. All these many colors are tribes. So every time we have a war in Yemen, the default system will be the tribal system. Meaning they will control their lands, they will make sure that there's security and order. It happens all the time. It happens actually even during when we have established governments. Because one of the most peaceful things is the mediation that done by tribes. So if anyone kills somebody or a crime committed, by one tribe, and the third tribe will join in and try to mediate. And so they will resolve it in a more peaceful way, and it's better than going to court. So everyone has like a win-win situation. So this is the tribal system, and right now it's the one that completely exists, given the war that has taken place. So people decide which part of the fighting they want to join, or whether they don't want anyone to enter their land, in the military or different groups, but they also make sure that their tribes and their families are protected and have agreements with the groups that are fighting. Can you so, like I was talking, the 1960s, there were two revolutions in the south and north of Yemen. So the south of Yemen was controlled by, like I said, about 12 many, they call them the sultanates, like Sultanate Oman, but it's like kingdoms ruled by families. The north was a kingdom, but it ruled by one family, the Hamidian family. Until 1962, this north part of the country, they created a revolution, they created a republic, they created a constitution. People had a constitution that are for the people, by the people. And so it was declared a republic. They started there, this part of the country, not the whole entire south, occupied by the British. They were controlling this part of the Aden seaport, because they were pushing some sort of trade when they were controlling India, when they were occupying India. So Aden was a strategic and important hub for the British to control. So they were controlling that part of the city, but they also were funding and taking care of the sultanates, the head of the sultanates, to make sure that they follow whatever the British told them, and to actually use them as oppressors on their own people. It is exactly this indirect sort of occupation. Anyway, in 1962, the revolution happened in the north, declared a republic. They helped people in the south. They sent people to help them declare a revolution against the sultanates as well as the British. And in 1964, they were very successful, and they were able to push the British out. And as a result, the country by default was divided into south and north, where the north was the Yemen Arab Republic, the north was the People's Democratic Republic. So what happened at that time, we talked about the 1960s, there was the Cold War that came after. The south part of the country went toward the Soviet Union. The north were not like the U.S. in the West. And so the rulers, and there were many incidents that happened between the 60s and the 70s, where a lot of presidents got assassinated or killed because people said Saudi Arabia didn't want to be part of it. They were funding certain groups and tribes to make sure there is no real development in turning Yemen to a republic. So anyway, there's a lot of events that happened between there until the 70s, where the Cold War was happening between 70s, 80s, between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The rulers of the South adopted the socialism. So there was a socialist system in the South that transformed the whole society into socialist. So there was, religion didn't exist. It was everyone is equal, and there was like sort of a military, a strong government run by the military, but it's still a socialist system. And the North was mainly a mix of civil society, tribals, people with ideas of becoming a republic and moving the country forward. There was a development here and there, but then there was a lot of killings at both sides within their own states. So we didn't get to move a lot and to make a lot of progress until the Soviet Union collapsed. South Yemen was becoming weak. North was becoming a little strong in a way, economically speaking, because the South was supported by the Soviet Union. What happened at that time in the 1990s, even before that, there were attempts by leaders from both sides to basically trying to unite the country, because Yemen was always one part. That's the only name of it, Yemen. Anyway, so that happened between South and North. There was negotiation attempted in the 70s, 80s to bring the country together, but that didn't happen because, again, like it was happening today, the struggle between the West and the East, right? So until 1990, leaders on both sides thought it was an important moment. Let's bring the country back together and declare unity. So it happened in May 22, 1990, where both sides became the Republic of Yemen. So you can move to the next slide. This is how it looked like. They divided into new states. They merged the whole system. The reason why we have a lot of states in the north, because it's the most populated. It's almost like, 1 to 10. Anyway, but most of the natural resources are also in the south. 1990, unity happened. They established a great constitution. Again, it's like up-to-date, 4-term presidential election, parliaments, and it was a real system that people fought to, to move forward and to be part of the developed world. And so there was a great movement. There was great election. And the unity, there were about 50 political parties declared, right? But the main ones were the socialists in the South, and the People's Congress, and the North. Anyway, that happened 1993. People in the North, I'm talking about the leadership, thought they becoming threatened because the socialist ideas, in a way, were spreading, going through the North, where people started trying to get out of this tribal system and controlled by religion and stuff like that. And the South was the opposite. They want to go back to religion, and they thought, that there was a lot of things that they were missing. And so Saleh was in charge. I'm sure you know President Saleh was killed a few months ago. He was in control with the big tribes, the tribe called Hashid in the north part of the country near the capital. They were in charge for a while. And so they thought it is time for them to use religion and to declare a war against the leaders of the South so they can capture the whole entire country into their own ruling. So Saleh and his family and tribe can be in charge of the country. Next, can we go to the next slide? So what happened then, Saleh started assassinating the top-ranking leaders of the Southern leadership. Between 1994, he killed about 130 from the top leadership of the party in the South, and then they would push him back and said, we entered this unity so we can put the country together. But then they withdraw the leadership. They said we're going to go back to pre-1990, pre-unity. That's where Saleh declared the war. At that time, 99%, I think, the South and North were pro-unity. Every time people are pro-unity. So he won that war. There was a 1,000-day war between the Saleh troops and the troops in the south. The north won and became still one Yemen, and so people thought maybe for a good reason, Saleh will consolidate power, but at the same time we'll still go to the next election in 1994 and see how is that going to happen. But apparently Saleh dominated the whole thing. He was able to buy the tribe leaders, religious leaders, everyone across, all things. And also people thought maybe the good step going forward to develop the country, that didn't happen. At that time Saleh kept consolidating power. He ran the military, the judicial system, executive branch. So he was in charge of almost everything within the government, one family and his own tribe. They manipulated everything. They controlled the whole entire country. Election after election, he was winning by 80s and 90s, and people thought that was not a democracy. So as a result, Saleh declared a war against what we call the Houthis today. They were in this part of the country. So I have 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to move fast, as complicated as it is. So Sada is like where the Houthis come from. Saleh declared a war against them. They were trying to actually overthrow the government. Houthis come from the families of the Hamid similar families. They related to the Prophet Muhammad. They think by default they have the God-given rights to control the country. Right? So the same families who were ruling the countries for 1,000 years, they thought it was time to come back for them. They have to take the power back. So it struggled for power. Saleh declared 6 wars against them. They were fighting each other, and each war would end up with a phone call between both parties. And 2007, the Southerns felt they were excluded from the system, no leadership positions, they don't have access to the system, especially the military, heads of the military, started organizing a protest to basically regain their position that were removed after the 1993 war. They did it peacefully. That momentum gained some sort of support, a real movement support, and that's where the Southern movement came from. They started demanding that they just want to be treated as equal citizens, and that movement moved today toward trying to regain our south part of the country. That's what's happening today. Anyway, at that time, in 2007, the Southern movement started. Houthis was on and off between the government and the Houthis, and then Saleh thought to pass power to his son. So there was fake elections. Didn't really happen. You have a strong society in the country. And the Arab Spring came in 2011. That was an opportunity for Yemenis. They all came and millions into the streets, civil society, students, political leaders, tribal leaders, all peacefully. Given that Yemen has about 45 million machine guns, for each person maybe 3 machine guns, they peacefully protested for almost half a year until they removed Saleh. The GCC initiative came in, which is the Gulf countries came in with an initiative trying to broker a deal between the movement and the existing political parties. The protest of the Arab Spring was not as organized as it should be. They didn't have the leadership and the resources, just like every other protest. But there was an existing political party that was opposing Saleh. They stayed within that sort of negotiation. They brokered a deal where Saleh stepped down in exchange for the immunity. A lot of people rejected that. He walked away with $60 billion. His entire system was corrupt, and they all given immunity. Not only that, but also he remained a political actor. They didn't move him and say you can't really play in the political life. He remained to be the head of the most powerful political party in the country. And so he was playing, and most of the army are loyal to him, the tribe is loyal to him. So he played that game that actually allowed him to go back to the political life, brought the Houthis in to the capital.
How does the U.S. fall into all of this?
I'm gonna get to the U.S. So anyway, so this is what happened. The Arab Spring, as a result of the Saleh being removed from power, people given, and he and his entire government to be given immunity, there was a negotiation. So they brought all the people from all walks of life, political parties, students, youth, women. It was a very great sort of, they called the National Conference Dialogue, where about 500 people from the south, north, women. It was like 50% women and third youth, and it was divided in a very good way. Everyone came together. They negotiated how they want the system to be going forward. And there was a negotiation for about 10 months where they came out with a very good outcomes with establishing a federal system. This is how it looks like, because there were grievances in these are 6 regions. The way they thought it was like to divide it to make sure people in each region are given autonomy and sort of part of their natural resources, and to have equal access to the system. The real problem with Yemen is that everything was extremely centralized. It was a system that one person controls everything. He appoints the governors, he appoints the city officials, he appoints everything when it's supposed to be a democracy, right? So people on the local level was loyal to the president and instead to their own people on the ground and their own community to do something for them. And so that's why they thought to create a new federal system, divide into 6 regions. At that time, everything was drafted. The constitution was drafted after 10 months of talk. The Houthis were actually part of it, and they were given about 60 seats in the table, actually more than a political party got. And so everyone was like trying to show the people of Yemen that they were actually trying to do something for the common good. So they all were bringing their own good stuff into the table, including the Houthis. But then Saleh with the Houthis came together. Imagine, after 6 or 7 wars fighting each other, they came together because they come from that part of the country that was controlling the country for about 1,000 years. They don't want to lose power. The reason why they came back together because they don't want the country to go into a decentralized system where they lose access to the entire system. So this is what happened. They kidnapped the head of the National Dialogue when he was delivering the Constitution to the president for the people to vote. They staged a coup against the government. They put the legitimate president in their home arrest. And so this is what happened. And then the fight broke between Houthis alongside the Saleh against the legitimate government. Arab coalition formed by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other countries joined to fight in the Houthis, saying that they're proxy for the Iranians, and that's how the whole thing is happening. It's a war. Where did the U.S. stand in this? U.S.'s foreign policy is always bad for Yemenis. They have drones, ongoing drones for the past decade, killing innocent people left and right without any accountability. They actually embedded with Saudi Arabia, and this is their main ally in the region. They've given almost the whole Yemeni situation into the hands of Saudi Arabia and the UAE to do whatever they want to do with Yemen. They provide logistical support, actually committing crimes against Yemenis. And so everyone is committing crime in the country. Houthis are committing more aggressive and gross human rights violations against Yemenis than the Arab coalition. Arab coalition equally committed crimes against Yemenis. They targeted mosques, they targeted schools, they targeted companies, they targeted almost everything, roads and almost everything in the country. The country is like zero. They shredded the whole thing, and so now the fightings is still going in the country. As you heard, Saleh was 3 minutes. Saleh was killed recently by his own allies because the struggles for power. Saleh was using him, and they was using Saleh. I'm talking about the Houthis. And so they thought they somehow, at the end of the day, they knew one have to kill the other. But at that time, they just needed some sort of unity with the government and to control the system. And this is exactly what happened. To be clear about the Houthis, people think that the Houthis somehow against U.S. foreign policy and they fighting for the freedom of Yemen. They actually do the total opposite. It's a sect that is run by a few families. They think they have the God-given rights to control the country. They killed, blew up houses, kidnapped thousands of protesters, political politicians, and human rights activists. They recruited children in thousands we never seen in Yemen history. They turned schools into military bases for the purpose of one family regaining power. So they kind of have a good advocacy to show the world that they're actually against the U.S. foreign policy. They actually in bed with U.S. right now, fighting Al-Qaeda. And at the same time with Iran. They use in Iran. People in the West trying to downplay the Iranian interference is strong and it's there. All the media communication of Houthis that are based on Lebanon, where Hezbollah run the whole thing. So the main TV, the reporters, advocacy groups that go to the UN in Geneva and the US are all based in Lebanon. And so it's clear that there are Hezbollah fighters in the ground and stuff like that. People are trying to downplay that, but that exists, and we know it as Yemenis, and we know it's happening on the ground. There is, of course, the Saudis using this as a way to control the country. They don't want a democracy next door. We have a lot of natural resources. There is some misconceptions about Yemen always. Every article that I have read about Yemen, it said the Arab poorest country, right? You see it all over. Like no matter what they say in Yemen, they still say the poorest nation in the Arab world. We're not poor. We have the most corrupted system in the world by international Amnesty, Transparency International. Everyone knows that Saleh's regime was the most corrupted regime, looting the people's money and natural resources. We have oil, we have gas, we have gold, we have islands that we can turn into resorts. There's so many things that can be done, and we have millions of workers and investors abroad that can come home if there is a real system that would actually give people equal access. With that said, I'll end it here if you have any questions.
Later, but we have one more speaker from Amnesty International, and thank you very much for that. We now have Shereen Condros from Amnesty International. She's a broadcast journalist who has worked for Al Jazeera and a number of other well-known institutions. And we thank her for coming.
Sure, thank you. For inviting me, and I'm so heartened to see that so many people came out today to hear about Yemen. I was a broadcast journalist for about 13 years, and I covered the Middle East and lived in the Middle East and covered Yemen in 2011, the uprising, and then was there around maybe 3 or 4 times since March 2015 when the current war started. And decided to leave and become a human rights advocate in large part because of what I saw happening in Yemen and what I was reporting on, and the fact that I felt that my job as a reporter was just to tell everyone what was going on, and I felt that I needed to do more and to be part of a movement that tried to change policy. And that's really what I try and do now. My current job, I'm the Amnesty International representative at the United Nations. I don't work at the United Nations, I don't work for the United Nations before I start getting heckled by people. I lobby on human rights priorities, and I head our team there. Yeah, and I would just say that I have been given the impossible task of, in the next 2-3 minutes, and I promise to keep it to 2-3 minutes, to tell you about the humanitarian situation on the ground. So I just want to apologize in advance because I'm going to really lower the tone and of this, of the mood here, and because it is a very bleak situation. And I can only imagine that the organizers decided if they're going to have someone talk about how sad the situation is, they might as well get someone with a British accent who lessen the blow for you, but I don't know if I can even do that. Back in 2015 is when the United Nations actually said that Yemen was a humanitarian catastrophe. That was maybe 3 or 4 months after the war had started. And now there aren't words that can describe what's going on. In 2016, the UN looked at its humanitarian response and all the crises around the world and decided to devote most of those to Yemen. So they took from Syria, they took from South Sudan, those who they had on the ground, and they actually devoted those kind of resources to Yemen. So there was an early warning trigger at the UN where they knew that the situation was becoming that catastrophic. So fast forward now to 2018, and the emergency relief expert and the head of OCHA went to Yemen. He came back and gave a recent interview, I think a few weeks ago, to Al Jazeera English, and when they said to him, can you describe the situation there? He looked into the camera and he just seemed like he didn't have the words, and he goes, it's like an apocalypse. And that's really what people are seeing on the ground, this is really the situation. There's 27 million people in Yemen. 20 million of those rely on humanitarian assistance. That's over 80% of the population. We haven't seen a humanitarian crisis this big in decades. In fact, the UN says in more than 50 years. So, as much as I can sit here and give you all of these facts and figures, I can tell you that 3 million children and women who are either pregnant or breastfeeding are in need of food, that they're severely malnourished. It's very difficult, unless you see it for yourselves, to really appreciate just how terrible the situation is. So that's all the very sad and the bad news about Yemen. And also someone mentioned the cholera outbreak. Again, one of the worst that we've seen in modern times. 1 million people are now infected, or possibly infected, and thousands, we think over 2,000 have been killed because of cholera. And then now I will slightly take issue with Ibrahim, because I agree with most of your analysis and what you said, but from Amnesty International's point of view, and we've managed to report quite a lot from the ground, there are certainly war crimes being committed by both sides, by the Houthis and also by the Saudi-led coalition. But by and large, the brunt of it is being committed by the Saudi-led coalition. They have killed many more civilians as a result of barbaric airstrikes than the Houthis have. And it's always very difficult to compare these things. Is it about how many people you kill or how many children you kill? But at the end of the day, when you catalog what the Saudi coalition have done, their targeting of schools and health facilities and hospitals, which has brought life in Yemen to a grinding halt, it's very, very difficult to excuse them in any way. And again, not to say that the Houthis haven't. We've documented every time we go crimes that are being committed by the Houthis that amount to possible war crimes, including using child soldiers, torturing, imprisoning human rights defenders. But I think that a lot of pressure has to be put on Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the Emirates for their conduct in this war. And this is where all of you come in, because there is no doubt that the US plays a huge influence in this. There are, US commanders. I even met someone recently who described himself as a human rights consultant that sits in the war room in Saudi Arabia, calling in airstrikes and trying essentially, and he was American, and essentially trying to advise as to how they can conduct these airstrikes and not be liable for human rights violation. And it's not just the US, it's also the UK, France, and the most random of countries that continue to arm Saudi Arabia, continue to call Saudi Arabia their ally, and this sort of hypocrisy really has to stop. And it stops by people getting angry and calling out their government, and you should all be very, very angry.
It doesn't seem right to say thank you after that evaluation, but I think it does give you a sign of what is going on. We have one other local Yemeni American who's going to come up and talk for a minute, but I think while we're doing that, we're going to start passing these buckets around. And please be very generous, whether it's cash or checks. If you don't have, this is for Yemeni relief. As we said at the beginning, if you don't have money with you, you can also donate later online. If you have friends, you were given papers on all the seats. Here it is, BFP to Yemen. And so if you have friends and neighbors who you think could also donate to this, please do so. And we will also have someone from Action Against Hunger, which is the organization that is going to be donating the money, and someone from Human Rights Watch who will be talking about the situation while we're collecting the money. Yes. So Jen Major for Action Against Hunger.
See if it's on the. She's on the stage. Right here.
Can you hear me okay? No? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Great. Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer. I work with Action Against Hunger in our New York office. And my day job is as a monitoring and evaluation advisor, which means I work with data and numbers, and I don't talk to people a lot about our programs, but I'm very happy to be here tonight because I care deeply about the Middle East and Yemen, and I think the previous presentation outlined very well the just how vast this humanitarian crisis is and how tragic the situation is for the people of Yemen. Recently, I think the number was reported at 3 million. I've heard the UN estimate that 11 million children are in need of humanitarian assistance. That is literally every single child in Yemen. And Action Against Hunger has been working in Yemen since 2012, providing mostly humanitarian assistance focused on reducing the risk and treating children and their families who are suffering from hunger and malnutrition. We're currently supporting around 40 health facilities. We're running cholera treatment centers. We're providing food assistance in the form of cash and food aid. We're doing water trucking. We are sending cholera response teams to try to trace contacts to try to reduce the spread of the cholera outbreak. And we're doing this work to really, in a context that's just really quite unimaginable. I've spoken to colleagues in the region just about how difficult accessing some of these populations are. Due to airstrikes, due to blockades, due to fighting, we've had to suspend some of our operations around Hodeidah as the front of the conflict has moved. And this is in a context where humanitarian needs continue to rise. Prices have continued to rise, and the amount of relief going into the country is nowhere near being able to meet the vast amount of needs. And it's also one of the most underreported and misunderstood crises around the world. So we're really grateful for your interest and your support tonight. And we guarantee as an organization that around 93% of all donations go directly to the programs that we're operating. So we really appreciate your support.
Thank you very much. And Michael Page from Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Michael Page, and I work in the Middle East Division of Human Rights Watch. And first, I just want to thank the previous speakers. It's a very hard job for Ibrahim to kind of give a modern history of Yemen in 10 minutes or less. So I'm just going to do, kind of three kind of points from our perspective. So Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, yes, we try to pressure those in power to respect rights. And in Yemen, that's been an incredibly challenging one. And what we've noted is the humanitarian crisis. But I think the first point I want to note is that it's not just a humanitarian crisis, it's a man-made catastrophe. So these statistics that you hear, and I'll throw one more out, is that since the conflict escalated in March 2015, 5 children are killed or wounded every day on average. And so these numbers are nearly impossible to kind of absorb, but it's the people on the ground that are fighting that are also kind of creating this. This isn't a natural disaster, it's a man-made one. And specifically, it's the West that is also kind of contributing to this problem. And I want to note that kind of the West is contributing, particularly the UK, France, and the US in several ways. One is the kind of political and diplomatic cover that they're giving to the blockade, which restricts aid, which stops fuel and life-saving aid into the country. But it's also the weapon sales. And this isn't just something that has started with the Trump administration. Maybe some of you remember this kind of photo op when Trump visited Saudi Arabia when he announced $110 billion of sales and they touched a glowing orb, right? This is part of the Obama administration too. Obama administration sold $20 billion in arms sales to Saudi Arabia in 2015. So our organization, as well as Amnesty, as well as Yemeni NGOs, have tried to do the following. They've tried to document where there have been apparent unlawful airstrikes on the ground. And in many of the cases, I think at least a half dozen, or almost 2 dozen that we've found, they're US-made weapons that the Saudi-led coalition is using to bomb markets, to bomb schools, to bomb hospitals, right? And what we're trying to do is link that research that we've done, that others have done, and tell our representatives that they need to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia until they stop killing people unlawfully. So I guess I'll lead with the kind of final point, which is that pressure, right, from us, from organizations like this, and I want to thank Brooklyn for Pete for inviting us out. It's great. You know, I'm not a New York resident, but I now live in New York. I think I'm in 10 years to get the card. But you know, pressure is building slowly in the political establishment. So, you know, we see that Norway has now stopped arms sales to the UAE because of the Yemen war. Germany has made positive indications about no longer selling weapons to the coalition. Even in the U.S., right, in what a place that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have a lot of influence in Congress, we've had multiple votes where bipartisan members in the Senate have tried to halt arms sales. And so even in June 2017, you had, I believe, 47 senators trying to stop weapon sales. And I think, you know, what the last kind of point I'll make is that we need to continue to pressure our representatives in Congress and in the Senate to make statements. Let's say this war is unacceptable in terms of the civilian loss of life. They need to stop restricting aid. And then we also need to end these arms sales until the Saudis respect human rights in Yemen and domestically. So anyways, I want to thank you very much. And thanks for being here.
I'd like Ibrahim and Shireen to come up for the Q&A, but before we start that, I did want to make sure that you know that there is a rally tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock in Manhattan on 3rd Avenue and 48th Street, outside the offices of Senator Schumer and Gillibrand. They're in the same office building in Manhattan, and that rally is in support of Yemen and stopping of U.S. funding, U.S. weapon sales, and the military aid that they're giving, like in-air refueling and so forth, to aid the Saudi assault on Yemen. Show the next slide. The other thing you can do is to call Congress and tell them that you want the U.S. to stop funding Saudi Arabia for the atrocities that they're committing. The numbers, by the way, the number, 877-762.
Go back.
Yeah, go back. 8762. So again, that's a number you should learn to dial very frequently, and please call them. You can mention this particular resolution that the House is considering, but call your senators too, because their opposition to U.S. support of Saudi Arabia is critical. And the last thing is, we do have these beautiful posters for sale to put in your windows, to hang on your wall. They're just $3 when you're leaving.
And you can join us and help us put them up all around the city.
And you're going to handle the mic for the crowd? Okay, so if you have questions,
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start with Penny.
I just want to announce that the collection here tonight was $1,012.
Yeah.
Please start to be around the board.
More online,
There's
right?
more there.
More
And there's
online.
600, over 600 online. Okay, so we're going over, we're going to hit 2,000 tonight. We're trying to get 1,000. We've more than succeeded that. And by the way, the person from Action Against Hunger said that 93% of your donations go directly to aid, but specifically these donations and the one online go to their operation in Yemen. So really, it's a very effective donation. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much for being here. I do have a couple questions, but I'd like, if I can, preface it with a little statement to that. Not too long, so you cut me off. I think the shocking thing about this catastrophe that's going on right before our eyes is that there's no anti-war movement in the United States. How long do we have to wait to stop this? And I think that it's our real responsibility, and I think the way to stop it is, of course, to stop the United States supporting Saudi Arabia and the atrocities there. So that's just a brief statement. My question then becomes, maybe a little thoughts about how we could build a movement, number one. Number two, I don't also think that it's necessary at all for us to take any position about the internal dynamics of politics in Yemen. Of course, we need to learn the history, but it's not for us to take a stand. It's counterproductive to building a movement in the United States. We have to have certain demands, that is, U.S. end of the money to Saudi Arabia, stop the atrocities and end the military action from all sides. And I think if we know that, then we can build a movement. So my question then becomes is, also I'd like to know a little bit about the Yemeni community in the United States, what their thoughts are. And I'd like to know, so I have two questions. One is, I'll narrow it to two. Number one is, I'm curious about the Yemeni community. Number two, I'm interested in what your thoughts on building a movement and what those demands and can be.
You want to make it a short question.
Oh, sure. And I just have to say that I have to leave in about 10 minutes, so maybe I'll take a few questions and then go. But just, I mean, to answer yours, someone said that the Yemen war was a forgotten war. I don't think it's a forgotten war. It's an ignored war. The Yemen war is one that has been covered by journalists, not enough, but it has been covered by journalists if you compare to Burundi, which gets absolutely zero attention. It's just ignored, and it's ignored because it's being conducted by Western powers, and there's so much financial interest there. And we're living in a really difficult time. I mean, the reason why the UK continues, to arm Saudi Arabia is in the context of Brexit and the fact that it cannot afford right now to turn its back on this ally financially and economically, and the US has its own financial also implications. So I think that it goes pretty deep, but in terms of what we can do, awareness raising is a big one, and to come out of sort of just talking amongst ourselves, because we all know that we are liberals and we are left-leaning and we have empathy towards others, and actually start speaking to our neighbors or people at work or whatever, and sort of tell them about what's going on in Yemen, and because a lot of it is just sort of pure, ignorance and not knowing really what's going on there. And I think the first step is that people know about what's going on, and then you get angry, and then you write to your representatives, and some momentum has to grow from that. But without any real sort of impetus for these leaders to feel that their populations are angry about this, then why would anything change? And the Saudis have been very clever at blockading not just goods and food and so on, but also not allowing human rights investigators and not allowing journalists into the country. So, it's a challenge.
Yeah, just to briefly respond, before I get into the answer, I just want to make clear that the Houthis and the Arab coalition, like by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, equally, and I said that, equally committed crimes against humanity. So I'm not giving anyone a break or one over the other. However, everything was documented. We're talking about the numbers that were documented by friends and Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and I would like to thank them for their efforts. However, the reporting out only on certain sites, not on every site in Yemen where crimes were committed against Yemenis. And we're talking about, for example, Al-Bayla. I don't think any NGO has gone really explored that city, that many crimes and landmines and stuff were committed by the Houthi militia. So all the numbers out there are similar. They say the numbers are close between the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition. However, the reality is still way different. No one organization, no one party can document everything that's happening in a country. But what we need is accountability, right? I don't think even in a future negotiation, political negotiation, that immunity should be given to anyone. I think we need to make sure that it's clear when there is any political negotiation that the word lords, not to be at the table like they did in the first place. So this is the problem. Going back to the Yemeni American community, we actually are targeted right now by the Muslim ban. We have people, there are thousands of Yemeni American families stuck in Djibouti, Malaysia, and Egypt. And right now, I've been working on Muslim ban cases, about a couple hundred people who, some of them, most of them, their visas were approved, were revoked afterwards just in the past weeks. So basically, there's a war against us by the US government here. So if you come through the airport, we're being stopped for hours and hours and hours. I have my sister and niece and nephews, 12 years old and 8 years old, just came in last month. Actually, the kids were interrogated and were asked why you coming to the U.S. You're talking about a U.S. citizen born in the U.S. asked why you coming back to the U.S. So there's a lot of things that are committed against Yemen. We can't go anywhere right now. Even the two countries that we used to go without any visas, like Egypt and Jordan, now we can't even we have to apply for the visas. You're talking about 27 million people cannot go in and outside the country because there's a complete blockade by the Saudi-led coalition. There's no flights and only one Yemeni flight that might fall at any time. That carrying how many people they can carry between Yemen and elsewhere. So we can't go back to the country. Hardly can ship money or food or anything. There's no commercial going to the country. So there's a lot of things that are happening to Yemen. Even if they allow us to do our own stuff, we can be in a way better position if they open the ports and the seaports and the airports. So right now, not a lot of people can leave the country. We have millions of people in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, elsewhere in the U.S. We can't do anything anymore because we can't move anymore. And if you're trying to come to the U.S., you're already found you are banned. So there is a lot of difficulties for the Yemeni American community, targeted by law enforcement, questioned at the airports, treated as second-class citizens.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Hi, my name is Rabia Al-Thabani. I am a Yemeni American community activist. I have known Ibrahim since I was a little girl. We organized for years on a field against the Saleh regime in Yemen. And we organized also when the Houthis came into Sana'a, because we're totally against militia rule, okay? But I am going to totally disagree with Ibrahim. He talks about, that there are war crimes committed on an equal level. When we talk about the Saudi, this is where Ibrahim may differ on this issue. The Saudis and the coalition have committed the majority of the crimes in Yemen. Okay, we are fueling and supporting and financially that we are making this possible. This is one of the most, I have no words because my husband is bad as well, by the way, okay? I have no words to describe the kind of pain and suffering, and Ibrahim. A lot of people are going through that, that, you both know that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to. The kind of suffering and pain that we're going through because of the Saudi intervention, and I had, from the very beginning, knew that when there was an outside intervention into this internal conflict that we had, and I totally agree with you, that it was going to make it tenfold, 1,000-fold worse than it was already. And so, I have to say this. I have questions. First of all, there is no freaking military solution to the conflict in Yemen. You are not, no way, going to get rid of the freaking Houthis who are Yemenis, by the way, at the end of the day.
So kind of
you're not, I agree, but you're not going to totally eliminate them. There's no military solution. We know this. The Saudis went into this, started bombing Yemen in March of 2015 and said it's going to take them 2 weeks, 3 years now. 3 years. We all know that. They have to come to the table. There's got to be a political solution. The only solution is a political solution. There's no other solution. Hamas. That's it. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. How many people have to starve to death, have to die from preventable diseases, have to what? How many more before we are honest with ourselves as a community who is, by the way, victimized twice by the war in Yemen and now by the fucking Trump, I'm sorry, administration. After one, yeah, the question is, do you agree with, or do you believe that there is no military solution? The only solution is a political solution. I believe you do.
So, it is important to know we all oppose the U.S. foreign policy in Yemen, right? There's no question about that. When I talk about what's happening on the ground, I'm not talking about it from a Yemeni American perspective. I'm talking about it from also the struggles that are happening in the ground, right? If it's all about peace and a true democracy, then we need to look at the picture as a whole. Saudi Arabia committing along the other part that I want to talk about, the UAE. They committed the most massacres in Yemen. They created militias and they run in secret detention like the Guantanamo style. They killing people that are actually opposing the U.S. and the UAE in the south. They created militias. So the claim that they kind of, I'll be honest, at the beginning, I would say the vast majority of Yemenis were actually with the Arab coalition until they found out that actually they're not in there to restore the legitimate government as they claim they are. Because what they're doing right now is undermining the actual government they claim to support. They're creating militias all across the south. They're creating detentions. They're occupying all Yemeni islands and building military bases without the Yemeni government consent. So this is very important to know that they're not there for Yemenis, they're not there to restore the government. They're there for their own interests. It's to contain Yemen, to control Yemen, and to be all about humanitarian, right? Right now, I think the humanitarian issue is a political issue because the roots of it is a political, but they're using it as a way for Yemenis to accept any political solution. When we talk about political solution, we need to think about what kind of political solution in here. Are we talking about Saudi puppets and Houthis, the people that actually came together to kill Yemenis and committed massacres? This is the thing that I'm talking about right here. We can't have criminals to be at the negotiating tables. Now, you can have any political solution. There is a roadmap there about having a peaceful solution from the outcome of the national dialogue. Let me finish. So, Saudis are committing crimes against humanity along with the UAE, and so are the Houthis. Now, as Americans, of course, we have to impose to go against the U.S. Foreign policy because they only supporting the Saudis. They're committing crimes along the Saudis by providing logistical support. So they are in bed with what the Saudis and the UAE are doing in Yemen. But at the same time, there's someone who asked earlier about not allowing, are we only going to care about it from the U.S. perspective? But from a Yemeni perspective, it's slightly different. If you are saying, let's not support Yemenis, Yemenis need protection from militias, from X, Y, and Z. So if we just allow the Houthis do whatever they want to, and that's not our issue, if it's about democracy and about peace, we need to hold anyone who committed crimes against humanity accountable, and not just to think about it from the U.S. foreign policy piece. That's an important piece that we need to target, but also we need to hold all the other actors accountable, and that can be done by supporting the people of Yemen.
Okay. So obviously there's strong passions around this. I would ask people now, please, to ask a question. I understand people have points of view, but I would ask you please to ask a question. And in fact, to encourage that, I'm going to get 3 questions. I'm going to ask 3 questions, and then you can respond to all 3. So please ask a question.
Yeah. Can we through the mic?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's also important to put this in the context of the larger chaos in the Middle East. Condoleezza Rice around 2001, 2002, talked about how it was time to redo the Middle East, and that's what we're seeing. My question is, I've read reports that there are actually U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen, so I'd like to know if you know anything about that. And what's the role of Israel in all of this? Are they playing any kind of a role? I'd be surprised if they weren't.
Okay, can you, I don't think I can see them right out there.
Hi, this is directed to Shireen. My name is Larry Everest. I help cover Yemen for RevolutionRevCom.us. And I share your outrage. I am so angry that this country, America, has so much Yemeni blood on its hands. It's committing war crimes. It's murdering children. It makes me sick. And we have to let every person in this country know that no, America isn't a force for good in the world. It's murdering children. And I would like you to expand on what you started to get into about how the U.S. is facilitating through refueling, through intelligence, through logistics, through selling weapons, including cluster bombs, what role they're playing in this devastating blockade, the Navy, and by the way, the Houthis don't have an Air Force or a Navy, excuse me. I wish you would really go into this, because this is something we have to indict this government, and I'd like you to talk about how it's being escalated under Trump Pence. Thank you.
That's why I have the mic.
No, I'm just putting it over on the side. She's just trying to.
مساء الخير. I'm talking Arabic. I'm not a professional in English. Maybe you can translate for me. My name is Salah Kulay. I just ran away from the war before like less than 2 years. في الحقيقة المسألة إنه أعتقد هذه الجلسة كلها عشان إنه نخرج بكرة مظاهرة أو مسيرة إنه نقول ما نشتي أمريكا تدعم السعودية بالحرب أو ما تبيع لها أسلحة. أنا أعتقد هذا كلام عبثي لأنه أولا هناك مصالح اقتصادية طويلة عريضة بين أمريكا والسعودية، أنا ما ليش علاقة في هذا كله. لكن أمريكا دعمت علي صالح، وعموما علي صالح مش هو المشكلة الأساسية في الحرب ولا هو كل شيء بالفساد والجريمة الكبرى. علي عبد الله صالح أو صالح هو مجرد رأس الحربة أو البيدق الذي عين من عصابة كبيرة في الهضبة في صنعاء، عصابة صنعاء التي أكلت الحرب والنسل، التي استعبدت الناس قرون. أكلت 26 سبتمبر.
Just give us a gist. Is there a question? No, there isn't a question.
أنا بس حابب أعطيك أولا لأنه السؤال الأخير لكن.
You can say it. Go ahead, say it.
So basically, he's saying, this whole thing is about, the U.S. and Yemen did the mutual sort of. There's an interest between the coalition and whatever. Like mainly, it's all about money and stuff like that. But also, U.S. in the past was supporting Saleh, and he was just the head of it, not the actual problem.
Yeah, صالح له تحالفات كبيرة جدا قبلية دينية أصولية. من أولهم أكبرهم هو كان عبد الله بن أحمد. عموما السؤال الحقيقي، هل تعتقدون أنه بمجرد أن أمريكا لم تدعم السعودية هل هناك ستوقف الحرب؟ هل ستوقف القتل؟ هل ستصلح اليمن؟ لا. اليمن مشكلتها أكبر من توقيف الأسلحة للسعودية. اليمن أيضا مشكلة مع احترامي شعوركم الرائع بالتبرعات، مشكلة اليمن أكبر من تبرعات. مشكلة اليمن حل كبير جدا، لازم يكون في تدخل عسكري قوي وما ما ينتهيش إلا باجتثاث عصابة صنعاء هذه، والتفكيك لازم يستمر.
Yeah, let's take another question.
We have 3 questions that we would like you to answer. Okay, we have one.
How about interpreting what you just said?
I'll be happy. I mean,
So in the
so what you want me to translate that?
Yeah.
So what he was saying is that donation of trying to just to target the U.S. foreign policy is not going to end the war, not going to solve the war. The war is bigger than that. You think, he was asking you, do you think that by stopping selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and you know, this is, I'm trying to suggest, do you think the war is going to stop?
Okay, so we have one other question, and I'd ask you one. We already asked.
Well, we have to shoot this down.
Yeah, and he also said that we should intervene by military.
Wait, what? Wait, say it again.
He suggested that a solution to Yemen was a military intervention.
Never mind. No, okay. Ask this question.
So, in the year 1990, there were 2 countries at the UN Security Council who voted against the U.S.'s bombing, or attempt to bomb at the time, Iraq. The countries were not Russia that opposed it, not China. It was Cuba was the one country, and the other one was Yemen. And the U.S. government told Yemen that's the most expensive no vote you're ever going to vote. And they've been paying that ever since. So, and the U.S. government, unlike the rest of us, have long memories for who's on their side and supporting their interests. So my question is, where are the banks in which Saudi Arabia and the UAE have their funds deposited in the U.S.? Who runs those banks? Where do they live? And how do we go get them?
We would like you both to answer. We have the question about Israel's role. We have a question about finance and
U.S. troops.
and whether or not U.S. troops are actually on the ground.
No, and the U.S. role in carrying out
U.S. role, yeah. I mean, I'll go first because I have to go. But there's a lot there, and very interesting questions. A lot of it I can't answer just because I do represent Amnesty International. We don't weigh into the political situation. I'm here to talk to you about the war crimes being violated and the humanitarian situation. U.S. boots on the ground, it's been suggested many times. As I told you, U.S. involvement, there is an active involvement in the war. Have we documented U.S. troops on the ground as Amnesty International? No, we haven't. But quite honestly, the U.S. don't need boots on the ground to call in the airstrikes. The UAE are doing that. So I don't even know if it's even relevant with technology these days to put such fine a point of soldiers on the ground. And for the question, thank you for the question about the exact U.S. involvement. I think my colleague from Human Rights Watch really, very succinctly told you about the extent of U.S. involvement, and it ranges from the very small and the sort of the rhetoric, the enabling of Saudi Arabia not to be seen as a pariah state because countries like the U.S. but also others see them as friends, and the U.S. president goes and holds a sword and dances around with the president, and all of this goes to really send a message that this is a state that is an ally. He's not going to go and do that, with Hamas, is he, or with those that the world considers to be terrorists. So, and Saudi Arabia should really be put into that category. And I think it's just that sort of that image and that rhetoric. And then there's real material support, real financial support that's out in the open that you can read about in the New York Times. The trade deals, the economic deals, the military support, and the actual support that I mentioned. That there are actual American military and advisors in the control room. There was a point at which the US and the UK really showed off to Amnesty International and to Human Rights Watch that they were in the control room, as if that was showing that they were really trying to control the Saudis. They don't really talk about that anymore because there have been so many of these strikes that have killed civilians that it's clearly shown that they are complicit. And we have also documented, as Amnesty International and also as a journalist, went and was privy to seeing, incredible amount, awash with weapons that had U.S. and British logos and signs and numbers on them. So it's not even something that's controversial to say. It's really become an old story. We keep saying the same thing. There is just the material support. There's and financial support. It goes on and on and on. There is absolutely no there's no controversy here that everyone should. What's that?
Blockade. How about the blockade of the U.S. and that? Is there Erdogan, and what is it?
The role of the US is the same, to be honest, as many other countries, which is to put pressure on Saudi Arabia. The US has that influence on Saudi Arabia. And the truth is that when Donald Trump last month, probably because he was upset at what the Saudis said about Jerusalem, but when he tweeted and released a very short statement as it was about the blockade, and that Saudi needs to stop that and get their act together, we saw a result days later where the Saudis started to open up a little bit. Hodeidah port isn't open to commercial goods, but it started to open up in a way that at least showed that they had listened to what the US president had said publicly. So I think that there is, you putting pressure on your representatives that will in turn put pressure on the president will make a tangible difference on the ground, make no mistake.
Going back to whether the U.S. have troops on the ground, clearly from the reports they have advisors at least. There was the U.S. Navy person was killed there months ago when they were targeting the so-called Al-Qaeda. So they involved in the whole thing. They provided the logistical support to the Saudis. I don't think the Saudis can run any military without the U.S. support. They actually, the warships on the sea, I don't think the Saudis are capable of doing anything without the main support of the U.S. Actually, maybe they end the picture for the U.S. The U.S. wants them to be there deeply so they can sell weapons and control them and threaten them with war crimes, because I think the one that is blocking mainly the international, blocking the UN Human Rights Council from having an independent committee to investigate all the crimes is the U.S. mainly, but on the Saudi side. And even the U.S. went against their own citizens. For example, when the war broke, we had about 30,000 Yemeni Americans living in Yemen. The warships were there at the water, and they refused to evacuate U.S. citizens. We had to sue them, and they still refused to evacuate a U.S. citizen, while at the same time providing military support targeting Yemenis, including U.S. citizens by the U.S. The U.S. is a big part of it. About the Israeli sort of thing, everything is possible. I haven't heard anything, I haven't seen anything, but that's part of the Houthi propaganda. Like the main thing is like they tell the Yemenis that they're fighting mainly the U.S. and the Israelis. That's their main sort of talking points. That's how they recruit people in the ground, is that the war is against U.S. and the Israelis. I don't know, so everything is possible. But the main people that are committing crimes against Yemen right now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, with the back of USA and the UK. So that's the main actors that are taking place right now in the country. I don't know if there's anything else that I missed. The drones taken. I don't think there's announcements about the drone strike, but they're actually targeting people all over the place. I don't know if the U.S. needs really, boots on the ground when they actually having militias and people like the UAE and the Saudi Arabia doing the job for them on the ground, and then they just provide the support by here.
I think we have. We'll take these two questions, and that will be.
Hi. I guess two things. One is a shameless plug. I'm a member of New York's Democratic Socialists of America. We're currently formulating a campaign around the war in Yemen. And I'm sorry, I'm a member of NYCDSA. We're forming a campaign around this particular issue, so I'm here to meet people and talk to people and whatever. And we hold our meetings at the beginning of the month. Catholic worker in the Lower East Side. If you're interested, come see myself or my comment. And my question, is related to the bar. So you made a very good presentation from Human Rights Watch regarding sort of what we should be demanding of our senators and our Congress people and lawmakers about the idea that we should be pushing them to end aid to the Saudis until the Saudis respect human rights. But I'm curious about what people who work for Amnesty or HRW think about, does that not set a low bar for what we're looking for to some degree? Because I know that you don't comment necessarily on the conflicts themselves and the internal dynamics per se, like over on the politics, but shouldn't there, I've never in my lifetime seen a war where smart bombs don't kill kids. Like, I've never seen a humane war fought in a way that limits the damage to civilian populations. And somehow America always seems to fight enemies who use kids as human shields. Like somehow, like they're always around. So I guess I'm curious about the politics of that, like setting the bar too low. Instead of demanding, like, look, we just want the Saudis to have a more humane war, we should tell them to stop bombing the country, you know? And that's sort of the bar that at least I think we should be setting, and I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
And we have a question.
Hi, thank you both so much. You're saying, we're saying there cannot be a military solution and there needs to be a negotiated solution, but you're very correctly saying if only the war criminals are at the table, what kind of solution is it? So who should be brought to the table? What are the elements within Yemen that should be brought?
And our final question.
The final question, is ISIS involved?
Okay.
You may have to take a stab, and again, I'm very much restricted. I know my colleague from HRW is too, and on the sort of, you're right that at the end of the day that we can't ask people to call for a ceasefire. That's just not what we get involved in, and the reason why we don't get involved in that so that we can have that neutral point of view, so you believe us when we say that these people are committing war crimes and these people aren't. It's just not what we do. This sort of the political maneuvering of it. But yeah, I think that everyone should think for themselves what they want to ask their representatives to do. And the only thing I'd say is that there's a bigger question as to weapons and the banning of weapons. And there are conventions, international conventions that ban cluster munitions and also some of the bombs that we're seeing being used that certainly are far from being smart. So but international law is flawed because international law was created by the parties, the member states, who really just wanted to protect themselves from being prosecuted in the future. So we shouldn't necessarily take that as the ultimate. Everything that we're saying, you should absorb and think what your line is, what your bar is. Don't let us influence you, but we're just, we're making our calls in the context and the limitations that we have.
Thank you. I agree with you. I haven't seen a lot of people calling for accountability. No one is pushing for the International Criminal Court to prosecute these criminals and to use that as a deterrence for the future. We can't just talk about stopping the bomb and stopping X, Y, and Z. How is that going to stop the war from going forward, right? There's enough weapons in Yemen to continue attacking. While this is important, we need to call to ban weapons to these countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We need to call for that accountability. We need to push for the international criminal justice to actually intervene. I'm talking about the ICC, International Criminal Court. That can be done by pushing the the UN Human Rights Council to have an independent committee to go and investigate all crimes by all sides. People of Yemen need accountability. They need justice. And I think if we talk about that piece alongside with the weapons, because that's part of it. Part of it is accountability. If people don't know, and political leaders, that there is no accountability, what's going to stop them from the work? If it's at the end of the day about the people, about democracy, and about justice and peace, we need to stand with the people and know what the people's demands are. And these are the people's demands. All these war criminals, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Houthis accountable so they can achieve peace. There's an important point is like, if we don't bring the criminals to the tables, who else to bring? I don't think the people right now on the table represent the Yemenis. Do you know there were an uprising in Yemen, millions of people in the street, people who called for peace, for the democracy, for the federal system, they're not at the table. Actually, the criminals are at the table right now. And so, now the UN, not the country that are actually trying to bring people to talk. They only bring in people that no one likes and everyone hates, right? And people that are actually fighting and using the war as a way to gain political part of the power, right? So they're not there to move the country forward or achieve accountability and justice, or even to advance the country economically. They're there for their own groups or personal interests, which doesn't represent the 27 million people interests. And I think if we try to bring people of peace, there are a lot of women's groups, there are a lot of youth groups, there are a lot of other groups on the ground, but they don't have the mainstream media, they don't have countries backing them. And now, since we with everything in the hands of the Saudis, it is almost impossible to have anything else other than something imposed by the U.S. and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the UK and Yemen. And we don't want anyone to impose anything on Yemenis because it's going to really stop the war. There is no accountability that would make sure going forward there is no wars, there is no people who would restart war again, because we've given immunity to peoples, we had a political talk in the past and it was great, it was peaceful. But then what? People use weapons and do the same thing. So yes, there is no military solution, but I think certain groups need to be weakened. They need to hand in their weapons when they go into a political talk. So you can't go to a peace negotiation putting a gun in someone's head. That's something we can't.
Forever, war forever, or what?
No, there is no war forever.
This is what a lot of Islam is saying. We need to fight them until we eliminate them. There's no way.
There is no elimination of everyone. We need to hold accountability.
Well, I want to thank you very much. And
there is some reports. I don't know if there's any accidents. There's some reports in here. I think it's a part of the international propaganda to keep war going on in Yemen. I haven't seen real reports on leaders of ISIS. There's Al-Qaeda. It's obvious. But we're going to have new militias that are created by the UAE and Saudi Arabia. They're going to look like ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the future if you don't stop that now. So that's part of the problem. There were some reports, but I think it's more of go in there, bomb, and continue to do it.
I want to thank you both, and I want to thank the audience also. There was good exchange. And again,